Good evening, Blues. Happy Monday. Not long now till the season starts. It's just 5 days away. Everton against Fulham in the Premier League. But today's all about a guy called Louis Foster and his book, Love and Loathing. That book is all about the David Moyes era. And without further ado, I'll bring in Lou. How are you doing, Lou? Good evening.
Evening, Steve. Thanks for having us on, mate.
No worries at all. So the Moyes era, what was that all about? Why did you choose to write a book about that period in Everton's history?
Well, it was my era growing up, really. So I was 10 when Moyes took over at Everton, and 21 when he left for United. So it was a team that I grew up watching from childhood into adulthood.
Okay.
So it was one that it was an era that I could relate to as an Everton fan. It was when I came of age as a Blue, and loads of memories of going to match with my dad and things like that. But also, there are some great Everton books out there about various eras in the club's history, but there wasn't one about that era yet, or even sort of 21st century Everton. So I felt it was about time that there was one. And as it was approaching 10 years since Moyes left, I felt it was a sort of opportune time to put one together.
Cool. So the period spans a decent number of years, doesn't it? I think it's 11 years from memory. Am I right?
Yeah.
But during that time, obviously, looking back, that was a really good period in Everton's history. We didn't think it at the time, but it was definitely one that I associate with stability. What else do you look back and say was kind of like the hallmarks of that area? Are there any defining milestones in that area that you want to pick up on?
As you say, it was certainly an era when we had stability, which, if you look at the eras immediately before and after it, stability has been one thing that's been lacking. We had a pretty solid backbone, a coherent identity on the pitch, and transfer strategy on a very, very limited budget, which again is something that we lack today. I think the key aspect was Moyes inherited a side that was we've been circling the drain for years and years. It was probably only a matter of time before we went down, and he was obviously quite a young manager. He hadn't managed in the Premier League at this point, but he'd done some good work at Preston. So it was a big job for him to undertake such a big club as Everton, who were likely to be relegated if something didn't drastically change. And he inherited a squad of players who, we were basically a retirement home at that point. If you remember, we were recruiting the likes of Ginola, Gascoigne, Mark Hughes when they were all in the late 30s. So the initial year or two under Moyes was about re-establishing some stability. So the comparisons to where we are now are actually quite remarkable. A manager coming in halfway through a season when we're in free fall, keeping them in the league, and then beginning to build a team from there. And that's sort of where we are now with Dyche. Obviously, it's still very early days for Dyche, but what's a shame is that the Moyes years now feel like a missed opportunity, because it was the best squad of players, at least on paper, we've had in my lifetime. It was the closest that we've come to winning silverware in my lifetime. We were sort of the best of the rest. So we were knocking on the door of competing again. We weren't quite doing it, but we were certainly, at least it felt like, going in the right direction. After many years of instability in the 90s. And now a decade later, it's like we're back to where we were 20 years ago.
I know, tell me about it.
So it's a missed opportunity. I think the side that he built probably could have won something. But even if it didn't, he built a solid foundation for the manager who inherited a squad to take on. And I think that was squandered by the many managers we've had since.
Yeah, I think for sure. It's interesting that you draw parallels with Dyche. We don't want to focus too much on that, but I think that there's so much to unravel, because your book takes place really at the heart of this period over a very, very long period of time. It pretty much goes from, am I right in thinking Unsworth got that first goal under that Moyes era? And was it Fulham as well? Again?
Yeah.
Remember? And it goes right through until Everton's last game away at Chelsea.
That's right.
And of course, then Manchester United, I think it was handpicked by Alex Ferguson, comes in.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get Moyes, and they got Moyes. But between all of that, there were so many things that took place, far more memorable than what we've seen in recent years, where I think it's all a bit of a blur.
Absolutely.
6 months into Moyes' reign, we had the goal from Wayne Rooney. I think one of your intros is "Remember the Name." How much of a factor was it that Wayne was part of the Moyes, the early part of that era? And do you think that actually Wayne benefited from having Moyes at the beginning? He was only 16, I think, during that goal.
That's right. Yeah, I think from Everton's perspective, having such a raw talent who didn't seem to have any fear or inhibitions going out on the pitch and was just eager to express himself, sort of gave that Everton side a dimension and a bravery and an attack and output that it otherwise wouldn't have had. And I think, Moyes is a very pragmatic and practical manager. He wasn't the type of manager who was going to give a young player that type of opportunity unless he felt he was ready to undertake it. And Rooney was probably already ready when he was 14 or 15.
I remember watching him in the Youth Cup. I don't know whether you saw any of the games, but
yeah,
he was absolutely head and shoulders above. I mean, it was a very good quality side, the youth team at Everton, and the way that they were bringing in players around them.
Yeah.
Moving on, Everton hit the dizzy heights of the Champions League. There was a whole hoo-ha of whether we were qualifying or Liverpool, and there was the whole business with that match. I don't need to talk about what game it was, but Kalina, and I think he's come out since that game, Kalina, and actually said, I think I made a mistake. But for me, I was, Everton had a really good chance of qualifying for the Champions League. It was after that season with all those 1-0s, wasn't it? I remember Lee Carsley was sat in the midfield, and he was an absolute battle ram for Everton's team. We had good players around him, but it's a side full of graft and quality. But then we got to the Champions League. Kalina makes a mistake. It's a Ferguson push, was it, on the goal?
I think he blames. I think he actually, it was Marcus Bent who got penalised allegedly for a push off the ball. That was the decision that got given anyway. But if you watch it back, there's no foul there. But yeah, it was. Obviously, the season before was brilliant, and we'd actually played some good football. But to go out in such sort of controversial circumstances, shall we say, I think that gave us a hangover on the pitch that lasted at least 6 months or so. If you remember, the following season we were quite poor for a while. It took us a good couple of months to get ourselves back together.
Why do you think that was?
I think it was the shell shock of going out in the Champions League. They worked so hard the year before to get fourth. And don't forget, the year we got fourth, we nearly got relegated the season prior to that.
Yep.
We'd sold Wayne Rooney, and we didn't really see a lot of that money to reinvest. He brought in Tim Cahill and Marcus Bent. So on paper, we were considerably worse off. And then obviously Cahill went on to be a brilliant player for us, but we weren't to know that at the time. Marcus Bent had a really good season as well. But nobody could have ever predicted we'd get fourth. And then to have that elation sort of ripped away in such controversial circumstances, I think knocked them for six a little bit, because we went out to Dynamo Bucharest. We dropped into the UEFA Cup and went out to Dynamo Bucharest a couple of weeks later. So after working so hard to get into Europe, to then be knocked out of 2 European competitions in the space of a month, I think just took the stuffing out of them, and it took ages to recover really that season.
You do see that a lot though with other teams, that They push hard one season, and then the next season they just can't keep up that momentum. But you know, it was a shock for the fans as well. I mean, who would have thought that would be pretty much our only Champions League foray? We'll get back onto Europe in a minute, but just going through things, I suppose, in chronological order. One of my favourite games of all time, it's certainly up there with the Spurs 4, Everton 1 at Ellen Road, is, and I'm not old enough to really go back to the mid 80s because I was only a toddler at the time, was the 3-0 Andy Johnson game. What your memories of that game? Where were you sat? What can you remember?
I was in the Lower Gladys, and yeah, I just remember it being a dead sunny day, and as usual, the sort of media preamble was all very Liverpool centric. You know, there was an expectation that they were just going to come and roll us over, and obviously Andy Johnson was absolutely outstanding that game. We'd not long signed him. I think that was his first season as our record signing. He was on fire, and he just had this electricity and this pace that he didn't quite know how to deal with. He was stretching their defence. They didn't know whether to sit tight or sit back on him. And it's really a shame what happened with Johnson longer term. He never recovered from a few injuries and a few other things that affected his career. But that game in particular was sort of one of the sort of games in the early Moyes years that really set a tone. It was a shame that Moyes was never able to match his Goodison derby record at Anfield. He had quite a good record in the Merseyside derby at Goodison, and it's one we haven't really replicated since his departure. But he was never able to manage it at Anfield, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was that game. I was also in the Lower Gladys. It was, you know, it's the sort of game you kind of dream of. You beat your rivals 3-0 at home, and I remember just being on a high the whole weekend. The goals obviously were both the Johnson goals were was the one at the Park End. I can't remember, but I remember the two at the Gladys Street, weren't there?
Yeah, there was the one at the one at the Park End was when Reina dropped the ball on his head. I think it was Carsley who had a shot and Reina couldn't hold it. And basically just dropped the ball on Andy Johnson's head. Probably never scored an easier goal in his career, if I remember rightly.
So that was what, 2006? What year was that? Six, yeah. So that was Everton's, you know, best win certainly in a derby game in a long time. I can't even remember whether we've beaten them by more than 3 goals. Everton then went on a bit of a flurry in Europe, didn't they? I mean, there was a number of years where we got in. You've picked out the following season, the cup run, and the exit to Fiorentina as being a standout moment. Tell me a little bit more why you chose that and what your memories are of that cup run.
So that season, 2007-8, is probably my standout season as an Evertonian. I was 15 at the time, so I was still in school doing like mock GCSEs and stuff like that. But me and my dad went everywhere together in Europe. So started off in Ukraine with the Metlas Kharkiv game in the qualifier, Nuremberg, Alkmaar, SK Bran, and obviously Fiorentina. And you know, we were playing really, really good football. And we came 5th in the season in the league that season as well. So we were maintaining a decent domestic form as well. But in Europe, you know, I'd seen us in Europe before in the Villarreal game, but obviously we went out after 1 game. So this was my first sort of European tour.
How old were you? Giving
15,
the game away.
15 I was. But, you know, it was
quite a commitment at that age, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was just, you know, going around Europe, having, you know, cheap ale in Ukraine and, you know, stuff like that. It was just, got a real taste for it. And unfortunately, it was a harsh lesson to learn, but probably a valuable one as an Evertonian. I got this sense that our name was on the cup, because we were playing such good football. We had 100% record in the group. We even beat the eventual winners in the group in St. Petersburg. And then obviously that Fiorentina game, we were 2-0 down from the first leg, and we went 1-0 up quite early on. Andy Johnson scored early on. And then Sebastian Frey, who was in goal for Fiorentina, just had the game of his life and saved everything we threw at him. But, Goodison was absolutely shaking. You got this sense that something was going to happen. And then that Arteta goal, the place absolutely erupted. And until very recently against Bournemouth and maybe last season against Crystal Palace, that was the loudest I'd ever heard Goodison. It was the most violently erupted in celebration.
And do you still stand? What so do you say? Palace was kind of superseded that. What about the goal against Bournemouth?
I think Bournemouth probably tops the lot for sheer noise, and Palace probably not too far behind. But up until those two fixtures, I would have said Fiorentina was the loudest I'd ever heard it. And I'd heard a lot of fellas older than myself talk about comparisons to the noise at the Bayern Munich game in '85, in terms of the atmosphere and the celebrations when the goal went in. Obviously, Fiorentina ultimately ended in disappointment, going out on penalties. It's a harsh way to go out of a cup as well after such a fight back. But nonetheless, that season for me stands out as one that the memories of going around Europe and stuff with my dad, that'll stay with me forever.
And of course, that becomes a bit of an addiction once you start to get used to following your side home and away, and then abroad. You desire that, don't you? And unfortunately, that's not been there in recent years. Has that affected you? Do you think Everton have got any chance of getting back into Europe anytime soon?
I do miss it. I miss it a lot. And another sort of cruel twist of fate is as you're a younger man and a younger fan and starting to get used to it, and it's looking like we can begin to compete regularly in Europe. We haven't really been in it very much since, so I do miss it. We're a million miles away off ever getting to that stage again. It's going to be a long road back to any kind of competing at that level. Unfortunately, Dyche, he did get Burnley into Europe. He got them 7th one season. He got it in the Europa League. So never say never if he's given time.
Yeah, I mean, it is ultimately it is sport and it's unpredictable, and we have seen some strange bounces. I think Leicester are a good demonstration of the bounce. I think they won the league after they were really pretty much nowhere the year before. Am I right in thinking? I'm not saying that that's the hope we should be clinging on to, but I think that we do have this impression that it's like a decade away from us getting back into Europe. Maybe it's not going to be that far. Maybe it's only a couple of years, and it's just a question of giving Dyche enough time.
I hope you're right. I think the fact that there's now a third European competition gives a lot more teams more of a chance. There's the Europa Conference League now to qualify for as well. And, you saw Villa last season getting into it after, recruiting Unai Emery sort of at a good stage of the season. They benefited from recruiting well in terms of the managerial post, because they were looking like they were going to be sort of relegation fodder at one point. And he really turned it around quite quickly. So things can happen. Obviously, West Ham have just had maybe the best night of any West Ham fan's life the other week when they won the competition, and they haven't been particularly strong in the league for a couple of seasons now. Do
you still admire Moyes as a manager now? Do you think he's doing a good job at West Ham?
Obviously,
kind of a bit nip and tuck as far as whether he's going to keep his managerial seat there, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was looking a bit grim for him at one point. I don't think they could possibly get rid of him now. He's just won them a European trophy. Obviously, he got them to the semi-finals of the Europa League the season before as well, which was another impressive position to get West Ham. But up until that, his record post-Everton was as sketchy as Everton's post-Moyes. He hadn't really been a success to any degree anywhere. He was a failure at United. It didn't work out at Sociedad, likewise with Sunderland. And up until a sort of recent success with West Ham, he was looking a little bit like yesterday's man as a manager. But you can't really argue with what he's just accomplished, winning West Ham a European trophy. I wish it was us.
Yeah, I'll take any type of silverware at the moment. It would be about 50 pence piece, I think. That's about all we. Like, the trophy cabinet needs a bit of a dusting down, but at least we do live on that heritage. I was there in 2000. Was it 2009? The cup final.
Yeah.
And of course, Sahar scores probably unhealthily early in the game. I take it you were at the game. Where were you at Wembley? What do you remember about that Sahar goal?
I just remember being in a state of shock that we'd scored so early. It was a very good Chelsea side, and we had a couple of injuries. Arteta was out, Jags, and this was Chelsea, sort of with the likes of Lampard and Drogba in their prime, Terry, Ashley Cole, players like that.
Quality, right?
Sorry.
It was a very high quality side, that Chelsea side. Much more cohesive than the current Chelsea side, which
it was top class. So you knew it was going to be an uphill struggle to beat Chelsea, but after scoring so early, for me, I felt like we should have approached the game at 1-0 as if it was still 0-0. I think like once we went 1-0 up so early, there was a propensity to sit back and just try to soak up the pressure and hold on to the lead, which with a team with the quality of Chelsea at that time may have been a mistake. We couldn't have sat back for 90 plus minutes. So I felt he should have still approached the game as if it was 0-0. Don't change what the initial game plan was. But Chelsea actually scored a third goal in that game, but it wasn't given. I think it was Malouda had a shot that went over the line, and it wasn't given for whatever reason. The referee or the line
pre-VAR.
Pre-VAR. So it could have been 3-1 actually on the day. But I certainly, one thing is for certain, is that when I was sitting there, as gutted as I was, and it was one of the most sort of disappointing days as an Everton fan, I didn't think it'd be my last final as an Everton fan to date, because we were moving, or it seemed we were, in the right direction. And we've been in the League Cup semi-final. The year before, we were getting there or thereabouts in Europe. So I did feel like, it's okay, we'll be here again. And unfortunately, we haven't.
Oh, that's the headache that comes with following Everton. And of course, you'll get to follow Everton right throughout the season here on Follow Everton, aptly named the channel that we started to grow during lockdown. I don't know whether you know that, Louis. I think there's a question that most people have been burning to ask, which is how your name came about. But before we do, we'll do our signed competition, because I think it's going to take a number of minutes just to get people to have a think about the answer. So do you want to read out the question? This is to win a signed copy of Lou Reed Foster's book, Fear and Loathing at Goodison Park. Signed copy is going to be on the way to the first person too. Do you want to name it?
Okay, so the question is, who scored the last goal for Everton of the David Moyes era?
So there you go. It took me a while. In fact, I think Lou, I think it took you a while to come up with this, but it's quite a good one. So anyway, the first person to correctly comment will get in contact with you, and we'll send off a signed copy of the book. And if you're unfortunate enough not to win, then we believe that there's a few quid off on the Amazon hard copy, and it's definitely worth a read. Full of interesting Everton chapters around the stuff there from Kirby, the stuff from the Arteta money. You can name it. Everything is in Lou Reed Foster's kind of epic book. If you think, if it was a film, your book, which director would you choose to make it?
Good question.
Is it epic enough to be a James Cameron special where it takes 10 years to make?
Yeah, it could be. I was going to say Tarantino.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be very, very graphical.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that would certainly be an interesting one. Of course, the book covers such a huge amount. We can't even really scratch the surface. But I think towards the end, obviously, we spoke about Everton's last game, and we might need to give a clue as towards maybe towards what that game was about. I'm sure there's people doing research to see who they can win. But what do you remember about the sort of end of the era? United came in for Moyes, didn't they? Via Ferguson, and am I right in thinking that Hibbert scores towards the end of this era as well? Was his testimonial part of that era?
It was just about, yeah. It was the season before, well, the summer of 2012. So, the summer before his last full season. Obviously his testimonial against AEK Athens. Scored his one and only goal, and it was a good goal as well. You know, if we'd have known now, we'd have put him on the free kicks a couple of years earlier. But
that was the equivalent of that Sporting game that we had on Saturday, right? The week before the season starts, right?
It was, yeah, it was.
So was that the last season of Moyes then? That Hibbert?
The following season, yeah, 2012-13 was Moyes' last season then.
Do you think, in hindsight, Everton would have done better if they'd kept hold of Moyes, or do you think it was getting towards the end of an era where Everton needed to move on as much as maybe Moyes needed to move on? I mean, you can go on and on.
I think so, yeah. I think it had started to get a little bit stale for both parties. But obviously, you know, Moyes left. Well, yeah, he accepted the United job, and it was announced that he was going whilst he was still employed by Everton. There was still a number of games to go of that final season. So I don't think even if we'd have wanted to keep him, which, you know, we did offer him a new contract, if only to guarantee ourselves a fee, you know, in the eventuality that he left. But he'd had that last contract down. So I think even if we'd have wanted to keep him, he would have gone anyway. But I did feel at the time, and I probably still do, that that last season or two probably went a little bit stale. It could have done with freshening up. And you know, the first season under Martinez, which also, you know, didn't work out, but that first season, 13-14, it seemed like it was the right call to bring in a manager of.
Yeah, because it had a real bounce, a change of style. I mean, that's a subject. Maybe we'll do another video all about that era. But certainly now, looking at the pedigree of Martinez, you know, you could say that Everton, it was quite a scoop to get him in. You had that first season. Well, I felt like every game we needed to win 4-3 to get anywhere. Whereas obviously what had gone before was all about being tight at the back, being hard to beat. Yeah, great ethos. I've got some fond memories myself. I'm sure many fans do. Please, if you know the answer to this, which Scottish Everton forward scored the last goal in the match Everton played at Stamford Bridge in the last game of the Moyes era? It's not the easiest question, we admit. But if you Stu's got it wrong, it's not Morales. It's not a bad shout, but it's not Morales. Which Scottish player scored the goal? It's a bloody hard question anyway. You know,
Morales did score the last goal at Goodison of the Moyes era, so that's a very good guess.
Yeah, that was at home. We're talking about at Stamford Bridge. We're talking about the last goal in the era. Who was it? It was in a defeat, wasn't it, Luke?
I think 2-1. Yeah,
2-1. Who was the Everton scorer that day? Come on, Google. You know the answers. All about ChatGPT. That probably doesn't predate that. It may be incorrect, of course, ChatGPT. But yeah, it's all there. Well, Lou, I'm sure we'll get answering soon, and we'll sync up the winner with a signed copy of your book. And it'd be great to maybe have you on the show again. It was really good learning about your book. Obviously, the details are on there. You can get it from all these high street retailers. We'll leave you. We're just going to wrap up with a quick look ahead to the season. How are you feeling about this new season, and where do you think Everton can finish?
I'm nervous, to be honest with you. We haven't strengthened to a great deal in the areas that we need strengthening in so far. And after the last 2 seasons we've had, there isn't much room for optimism. I do feel we've got the right manager to get the best out of the players that we've got, as limited as they are, in Dyche. So for me, this season, hopefully we can just restore a little bit of stability. And I'm not expecting anything spectacular, but if we're just at no point in any danger of being relegated, I think at this point, stability is the order of the day, innit?
I think so. You're gonna can you put your name on a place finished? Where do you think Everton might finish the season? Be something to look back in a year's time.
14th.
14th. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. It's not far off where I think we'll do. I mean, bear in mind, last year I got absolutely spot on with 17th, but no one actually thought I was being realistic. So I think for the record, I think Everton will finish 15th this season. So you're not too far off me. Luke, thanks so much. But we're going to wrap up. Just give me a quick story about your name. Do you go everywhere signing autographs or no? Joking apart, your parents, they're big fans of the musician, right?
Yeah, big Lou Reed and Velvet Underground fans, both my mum and dad. Luckily, so am I. So
that's good.
Yeah, I know. It was nearly Howard Kendall. The story goes as well, but my mum wasn't keen on the name Howard, so they went with the favourite musician instead.
Right. Well, it's certainly a nice name, and it's one that stands out. Luke, thank you so much. Have a great week ahead. Enjoy the game at Goodison on Saturday, and do feel free to, like the other people watching, like and subscribe, and we'll get your signed copy off to the winner, which is going to be great. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having us on, Steve. Let's hope for 3 points on Saturday.
Absolutely. Lou Reed Foster there, and his book Love and Fear and Loathing at Goodison Park. We've got a preview to the Fulham game coming up on Thursday evening with our team, and it'll be great to get you on that stream. If you're interested in being part of Follow Everton, please get in contact. And if you would like to just comment, we will be reading out your comments and questions and things on Thursday's stream. And of course, we'll be there straight after the whistle when Everton play Fulham. The Goodison Park match is at 3:00 this Saturday, and it's our season opener. Well, that's all we have time for today, but we'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday. And thanks for joining us. And thanks again to Lou Reed Foster for being our special guest. Goodbye for now. Up the Toffees.